Hello, welcome again. Today we talk about user-centered design. A small introduction to understand what is the meaning of UX and in general what makes design. So let's start with a few examples. Understanding what the unit is about, we're going to do that through some of the examples that are coming up. So, why user-centric design? Think about the MRI machine. How do you feel about this? An MRI machine is generally by itself a scary process. But how do you think that children will feel about this? In order for an MRI machine to work, the children have to be extremely stable, not moving. But what do you think the children will do? This is a big issue. So imagine that this was actually built for children. And the problem now that you have is that it will not work because children are scared of this. So when they build this, when they design this, so not even build, but design this, they actually completely forgot about the part where you need to be able to build it for your user. And the user was a child. Did they take the child into consideration? The answer is no. So they had to take this back to the design phase and they had to redesign it. They had to come up with a way for children to use the MRI machine. And this is what they came up with. So they redesigned the whole thing. They redesigned the whole approach, and now children were thinking that this was more of a game than an actual medical procedure. So what is it that we need to keep in mind of when we design, when we create things? One is empathy, and understand that empathy is different from sympathy. Empathy is about understanding the user. So we need to understand what pain point does a user go through. That's why we say, as a designer, I feel the pain of my user. Instead, sympathy is a completely different emotion. Sympathy means I'm sorry that you're in pain. I don't feel the pain, but I am sorry that you are in pain. And these two things are very different. And as designers, we need to build on empathy and not on sympathy. So, let's have a look at another example that we had ready. So, if you go to this website, you will find that it is incredibly clunky and terrible and horrible. And I realize now that I don't actually have a picture. So I will edit later in post-production. But the problem here is that the whole website does not welcome the user, is clunky, is very difficult to understand even what the whole thing is about. So it's a terrible user experience. So for now, think about this. Think about websites or applications or products that you have interacted with, that you consider that they look good visually and they are appealing, but you soon realize that they were missing some expected functionality. And this happens all the time. We have a function, we have an application, and we say, oh, I wish this application could do this. Or you have an application that you think it will do something, and instead it completely doesn't. So start taking notes of this, because we will take this into one of our assignments. Let's move forward. Let's keep thinking about user-centered design from an academic perspective. So, and this is a simple Dilbert strip that pretty much says exactly the process that a lot of companies go through. And this happens every day. You can design something which is simple, like a point and click interface, or you could go and do something extremely difficult, that your clients do not understand, and well, basically you don't solve neither your business problem and neither your clients' issues. So, well, just go through the stripe. I guess this was just another kind of a nice breakup. So, what makes design? We have a number of things that we need to keep in mind. One is the interface, and the interface is what connects the user with the functionality. And then we have the interaction. The interactions is what actually the users do. So for example, button clicks or swiping or maybe using your eyes, or all of these actions that perhaps today they seem very normal, but they may not be 10 years ago. And then we have design itself. Design covers both the interface and the interaction, and directly affects satisfying the user needs and goals. So just to iterate, the interface is what is presented to the user. The interaction is how the user uses that interface, and the design is the overall of this. So let's start with looking at interfaces. So an interface is a software that shapes the interaction between the user, audience, and the situation, and a transfer between the user or audience and the situation. So the relationship required here has to be meaningful and has to be very clear. So let's have a look at one example. So this is Spotify. So Spotify has to achieve one meaningful outcome, which is to play music. So always keep this in mind. What is the final goal? The final goal for Spotify is to play music. So in this case, our application, we say that it is self-contained and it has its own interface. And everything that the user needs to do is contained within that application interface. So this application interface allows the user to interact with the application, and the final outcome is to play music. So bring up some ideas and start thinking, what are maybe the most used applications that you can think of? Let's think about the interaction now. So interaction refers to both the physical and the cognitive actions performed by users when they use an interface. So we have the pointing and clicking, we have the typing, we have the drag and dropping, we have the scrolling, we have the listening, we have the watching, tapping, gestures, speaking. Now, all of these have evolved through the years, and they have joined up with the interfaces. So things that did not exist 10 years ago or 5 years ago are now mainstream. So let's have a look at probably one of the most well-known examples. The swipe right or swipe left. You like or you don't like. So this is one of the biggest things that, for example, dating applications needed. They understood users, and users did not really want to go and read about the people. They just wanted to look at a face and decide whether or not they liked the person or not. So yes, no. They don't need to look at the profile. Most people, they just go into that frenzy of just right-clicking. And unfortunately, this is how it is. So start providing some examples. What are some examples that you can think of pointing and clicking or typing? So start making one example of at least one of each of these, because this will build up your knowledge of interfaces. One of the most common things that I do when I design an interface is to actually go and do research. So in my case, I use Pinterest a lot, where I try to understand what other designers are creating. So let's think about the cognitive interaction method. And it can be a lot of things. So first of all, think about the I theory. Generally, we read um, from uh, sorry, from left to right. So it is normal, for example, that we put things on the left-hand side, or we put things at the top first and at the bottom last. So for example, the footer will have some knowledge of the company, of the website that you built. But the main part will be at the bottom, and you might have things at the top which will help the user navigate. So this processing, this thought process, is what drives good interfaces. And there are some tricks to it. For example, think about eBay or any search search engine. The one thing that you can do is, for example, you start typing and then you start getting a collection of things. So that is still cognitive, because what you're trying to do is to try and play with the brain of your user and say, I already know what you want to look for. So this is one very key example as well. Let's look now at what is design. So design is the difference between doing it and doing it right. Normally when we try to think about design, the first thing that we do is that we might sketch things out. And normally what happens with that is that we sketch things out, we present it to the client gets excited, and then we need to basically redo everything because we didn't think about it. In that case, we are driving the user without actually knowing whether or not the user needs that. So that is the wrong design. Design is not just sketching things and making them happen. Design is about understanding what it is that we need to build and create many different versions of what we're building. So in design, you have to think about what other people will like. Design is a plan for arranging elements in such a way as to best accomplish a particular purpose. So what design should accomplish? Design should satisfy a need or something that the user wants to do. Therefore, the user cannot be left out. Assuming a solution without knowing the user may often become something unwanted. Think about the user satisfaction. People are different culturally and behavior-wise. Therefore, there is no one good solution for everybody. Everyone has a different feeling, and it's all about trying to make people happy. And it should foster creativity. Solving problem is about great ideas. Before thinking it is too difficult, you should try to envision it. If you can envision it, perhaps it's not impossible to build it. So, before thinking it's too difficult. That's what I was trying to say. Don't think it's too difficult. It's about whether or not you can envision it. If you can envision it, then you can probably build it. Don't think it's too difficult. So in summary, what is it that we're trying to say here? We're trying to say that we want to build something that the user wants in order to make him happy, and build it with creativity. So these are the three big steps. And let's think about usability. Okay. Okay. Okay, let's talk about usability now. So what is usability? Usability is the capacity for a user to actually make use of whatever it is that you created. Let's have a look, for example. Imagine a door. This is the simplest thing. How do you know whether or not you have to push or you have to pull? So, usability is concerned with making systems easy to learn and easy to use. This can lead to improved performance in the workforce. Poorly designed interfaces instead require extra user effort, cause misuse or not use at all, and they lead to errors and perhaps even to failures. So sometimes this is referred as user friendliness. So we are trying to make things which are user friendly, that users are happy to use. So what are the two major factors? The two major factors are visibility and affordance. These two together can be used to actually predict whether or not our application has been well designed for the user. It can be learned, but in truly intuitive systems, the visibility and affordance are innate. So imagine, for example, it's actually much easier to try and do something which is easy to use than to make it more difficult, because we are people. So we try to do things which are simple. So if we go to the example of the door, you can either push it or you can pull it. So how do we know the difference generally? Generally, the door, when we have to push it, does not have a handle. Otherwise, if we have to pull it to open it, it will have a handle and we will be pulling it. So this is something that refers as being visible, because you see the handle straight away or you don't see the handle, and is affordable. When you say affordable, it's not about the money, but it's the fact that the item, the design that we have made, is self-explanatory. So, for example, this is a good example. Ovens. If you have worked with ovens before, you know that they're really hard to use. They don't have any instructions because normally we throw away the instructions as soon as we buy them. So this is definitely not good design, because how do we decide which one is a timer, how to use a stop? This is very not intuitive. So affordance. So the appearance of the controls must afford. So that means they must suggest their functionality. For example, the way they work. One can either mimic real-world objects or emulate their critical aspects. So affordances are not intrinsic, but depend on the background and culture of the user. So just because you think that everybody will understand, you will find out that that's not the case. The most simple example, a handshake. The handshake pretty much all over the world is a good thing. In some countries, it's actually a very bad thing. So it's cultural. It's something that we have to take care of. So here we have the example of the door. And the door is, we see a handle. So what does that mean? It means that we probably want to pull this, right? We see a handle, that means a door that we have to pull. And instead, we have to push it. So what can we do to try and fix this? There are small things that we can do that can really help. So let's have a look at this door. How can we tell whether or not we have to push or pull? We fix it. We go and add a simple label on it that says push. This way, no one is going to make the mistake. And on the other side, we're going to write pull. Quite simple. Now, understanding users. As I mentioned before, user-centric design is about the users. We build for the users. The users are the people that have to be happy at the end of the day. The users basically make us understand whether or not our application is successful or not. So designers need to understand people. How do we understand people? I mentioned before, it's about empathy. It's about building a relationship with the user. And this way, we can try to fully understand what the user is going through, to understand the pain, to understand what the user needs. In that context, people represent clients or users, and understand meaning knowing how they work, knowing what they think. So how do designers understand how people work and think? This usually represents the major components of task and requirements analysis. Techniques include interviews, surveys, observations, direct or indirect, experience, and principles of theory. Now, although principles of theory are good and we can often repeat them, we can't just think that one principle will work for others. So we need to make sure that we treat every user or every persona as an individual. So designers must recognize the diversity of people who make use of the interfaces. Some will be able to respond immediately, others will require time to think. Some will focus only on what it needs to be done, others what should be done. Some will use their feelings to express a point of view, others will use logic. Some will act decisively, like yes or no, and not change their view, while others will perceive when plans need to be changed. So there is no one solution solves them all. What we can do is to try and understand what is the design that can satisfy our main target, our main persona, and then we try to accommodate for everybody else. This is a very quick example. There are people who are colorblind, they cannot see green. And there are people who can't see red. And there are people who can't see specific colors. So, in theory, I should make everything grayscale, but that's going to be horrible. So what I can do is try to avoid some of the colors, but understand that we're talking about a minority as well. So is this minority actually part of my clientele? Are they part of the users? And how much are they going to influence my outcome? So this is very important to understand. So there are many ways to understand users. Some like just know what to do. Others want to see what the goal is first. Some like color, glitz, and glam. while others absolutely don't care. Some want to know how it works. Others just want to know that it works. Some people read, some people hear, some see, some must do. So every user is a different user. The best thing to do is to try and understand who is your key user and develop around that person and try to accommodate as much as possible without destroying your initial application. So, types of users now. In any setting or environment, as designers tasked with implementing changes to current or new systems, you may meet a diverse range of users, and that is what I just said. Part of your job may be to determine and investigate the needs and requirements. And quickly you will realize how users, or workers, but most importantly humans, vary in their understanding of digital systems. We believe that everybody can go and use a phone application because we teach them to do it. That is not the case, because my dad, who has been using the internet before I did, I still have to fix all of his things online. And my dad is probably very well accustomed to the digital world. But he still has a different time reaction than what I do. So consider the use of Microsoft Word. Rate your expertise. Poor, okay, good. Changing the font of a partition of text. Are you good at it? Inserting an image, merging two tables, using a formula to sum a column of numbers, writing mail merge instructions into your document. So, how do you consider yourself in here? When you ask the question, can you use Word? And the answer is probably yes. How good can you use Word? And then you start understanding that there's a big spectrum between good users and poor users. And unless you have qualitative data, you don't know, because everybody's saying yes. So you must find a way to get qualitative data to say this person is good, this person is bad, this person is great, this guy is just a beginner. So how many of our class are good at poor at everything? How many are good at everything? Do you expect all inexperienced users to be poor at all tasks? Or do you expect all experienced users to be good at all tasks? So, like I said, there is a wide range of people, a wide range of users that are going to be using our application. So we need qualitative data to understand who we're talking to. Personas. So persona actually means person. That for some reason it actually went and borrowed the Italian word for it. Person is actually persona in Italian. Big deal. So personas are used to develop a precise description of users and their requirements. Being the victim of a problem does not empower the user to see a solution. Personas create imaginary people and we design for them. So what do we mean here? That the people who have problems have requirements. If they don't have a need, then we're probably creating for the wrong person. Now, just because you are having a problem doesn't mean that you are the best person to solve that problem. So what we often do as designers is we gather all the information and then we try to build something for that user without having the user there, because it will be biased. And as expert designers, we can easily drive the user to think the way we think. And that's bias. So we want to avoid that as well. So we generally design without them in the room, and then we go back to them and we present it to them. Personas combine characteristics of real people into one more imaginary people. into one or more imaginary people. Personas are useful in helping to guide decisions about a product, such as features, interactions, and visual design. Personas always use a photo of the person because we remember things visually and we can build mental models. So when we try to create this persona, we try to make it as a real person, as real as possible. And a real person will have what? We'll have a name, we'll have an age, we'll have a picture. So we always try to imagine them. And it is normal during a project that you start calling Luke. So for example, Luke needs to get up in the morning and go to school. His problem is that he misses the alarm. So we are going to help Luke to find a better way to get up in the morning. So this is kind of a persona. And the more information, the better, because we are building for a human. So knowing that the person is 20 years old or 40 years old is very, very important. Don't miss out on this. So you need to describe the person. Try to make it as typical as possible. And describe what the person does and what they will want to do with the interface. Personas, when combined together, build the functionality of the system. Keep in mind that at the end of the day, you need to solve a problem for the user. This is the most important part. The functionality is the solution to a problem. If my problem is I need to get up in the morning, my problem or my outcome has to be that after I implement my solution, I can get up in the morning. If I don't get up in the morning, my application has failed. So there is always a primary persona, the main user of the system, and there are always two or more primary personas because one persona can never capture all the functionality. Frankly, I do prefer to have the one single person and really go down deep on this person, but there's going to be many times where you want to have different people. Keep in mind that if you're looking at a business process, who are you building for? Are you building a solution for the shop owner, or are you building a solution for the customers? And that's where you start having different personas. So what are the advantages? Said to be cognitively compelling because they put a personal human face on otherwise abstract data about customers. And by thinking about the needs of a fictional persona, designers may be better able to infer what a real person might need. It's easy to communicate to developers and others to absorb customer data in a palatable format, in an easy to understand format. So the main reason why we do it is because as designers, we are very often outside of the development area and we need to make people understand. So sometimes it's not just about requirements. We can go and say, this function will allow me to log in into the system. But what happens if you skip a functionality like that? Then it becomes very problematic. So that's why we try to make it into a story instead, which is Luke has to log into the system. So if you think about this, the developer, but also you, will start imagining everything that is required. And the developer will probably think, oh, okay, perhaps this person has to register first. Because if you give just requirements, then a person will just go and develop the requirements. So that's an issue. Some benefits. We already mentioned this. They help the team members share specific, consistent understanding of various audience groups. Data about the groups of users can be put in a proper context and can be understood and remembered as coherent stories. And team member solutions can be guided by how well they meet the needs of individual users or personas. Features can be prioritized based on how well they address the needs of one or more personas, and they provide a human face so as to focus empathy on the personas represented by the demographics. Some criticism about this part. So some have been argued to have no clear relationships to the customer data, and that can happen. But sometimes you're building something that is not the customer because you're actually trying to solve a new problem. So it can happen that you are not basing everything on your existing data. There's no clear way to determine how many users are represented by any given persona, and that is extremely true. Once again, you're trying to solve the key person here, the key customer, or the person who most represents your customers. And no definite relationship to real customer data, and therefore cannot be scientific. As I said before, I mentioned it at the beginning, design is not an exact science. What we can do is to try to be as close as possible to our users, our clients, and try to make their life better. But we don't have an exact science. We can only guess. Because at the end of the day, design is subjective, it's not objective. We can design the greatest interface, but it can happen that the 10 people who are our users for the day, nobody likes it. So this is an issue. And this is why it's not a perfect science. That's why we need to do needs validation, which is basically understand whether or not we're doing the right thing. And small products have fewer resources to use persona development. Well, that's normal. If you have a smaller project, less resources. It's also true that you have much more defined personas. Perhaps you only have one persona, and that will make your life a lot easier when you go and develop. So how to move forward? Understanding more and working with personas is a key part of this unit. Creating and working with personas, we'll be doing that in the practicals, and we'll be doing this in the next class. If you want, there's a reading that you can go and do. And if you haven't done so already in the practical, okay, we'll discuss this in the practical. Summary, I guess we can move on to the summary. So an interface acts as a bridge between the user and the medium, which assists us in completing tasks and achieving goals. Interaction includes physical interaction, like tapping using gestures or cognitive interaction. And a usable interface is easy to learn and easy to use. These are the things that we need to bring home. Understand what is an interface, understand what is an interaction, and what it means to have a usable interface. Okay, so this is the end of the first lecture. Thank you. Bye-bye.